founder of American psychology. He spent 12 years writing one of the most thorough 1,200-page psychology books, which kickstarted it all for us. Without him, therapy wouldn't exist. He set everything in motion. The domino effect. Thanks to William James. And I have come into an Encyclopedia Britannica set. And the first book that I opened was this great book of the Western world, William James. Number 53, which adds up to 8, the number of infinity. And so I thought I would share some of this with you today. It's quite fascinating, the principles of psychology. Can we see that? The principles of psychology. We will be reading the principles of psychology today. Just a brief taste of it, of course, or else we'll be here for years. Which I would love nothing more, but we have to do things as humans, unfortunately. Beyond learn about William James. Principles of psychology. How nice does that feel, though, before we begin? What a sound that is. I love these crests. Let's see, can you see that crest right there? Isn't that fun? It's a fun crest. Looks like a griffin. I'm probably butchering that. Encyclopedias are fascinating because they contain in print so much knowledge, so much information that we now pretty much only store on the internet. I like something physical and tangible that I can touch. I like to get my knowledge from the books. So we'll start with a biographical note so we can learn a little bit more about William James. 1842 to 1910. The founder of the James dynasty in America, William James, emigrated from Ireland in 1780. Upon his death, he left a fortune which enabled his heirs to become financially independent upon coming of age. It was difficult for the James children to explain their father's life of religious activity, dissociated from any established church. Say I'm a philosopher. Say I'm a seeker for truth. Say I'm a lover of my kind. Say I'm an author of books if you like. Or best of all, just say I'm a student, the elder Henry suggested. William and Henry were born in New York within 15 months of each other and always maintained a warm, intimate relationship. Even as a boy, William manifested the extraordinary personal and intellectual gifts which were to set him apart later in life. Henry records that occasions waited on William had always done so and entered his intelligence as with the action of coloring matter dropped into water. Because of the elder Henry's restless wanderings on the continent and his desire to have his sons be something unconnected with specific doing, something free and uncommitted. The boys received schooling irregularly in London, Paris, Boulogne-sur-Mer, Geneva, and Bonn. This type of education was aptly suited to the temperament of young Henry, whose assimilation to the career of writing, except for a brief detour into the study of law, was immediate and complete. William, the founder of American psychology, on the other hand, only gradually and after many false starts was able to find an adequate outlet for his manifold talents. He successfully studied art, chemistry, anatomy, and physiology, accompanied Louis Agassiz on an expedition to Brazil, and took a medical degree at Harvard in 1869, though he seems to have had no intention of practicing. This uncertainty in the professional sphere was accompanied by a severe mental depression. He seems, like his father, to have suffered an acute spiritual crisis. As the senior Henry found a satisfactory explanation to God's relation to man in the religious teachings of Swedenborg, so William was delivered from the deterministic universe of Mill, Bain, and Spencer by Renouvière's discussion of free will. My first act of free will, he proclaimed, shall be to believe in free will. In 1872, William was appointed instructor in physiology at Harvard. The appointment to teach physiology is a perfect godsend to me just now, he wrote to his brother Henry. An external motive to work, dealing with men instead of my own mind, and a diversion from those introspective studies which had bred a sort of philosophical hypochondria in me as of late. In 1875, he gave a course on the relation between physiology and psychology, and set up the first laboratory in America experimenting in this field. Ow, my foot's falling asleep. We're gonna wiggle it for a little bit. Let's just wiggle our bodies for a little bit, shall we? You can't see this right now, but my microphone is currently perched on a plastic crate, and it is stacked upon two books. The first is Psychomagic by Adirondacks. Shout out, Adirondacks. And the second book is Bedroom Beats and B-Sides by Laurent Fantoni. I sit on the floor to do the ASMR, so occasionally my limbs start tingling in a way that's quite uncomfortable, and I need to shake them out from time to time. So I appreciate your patience in this endeavor and a little behind the scenes. Anyhow, in the summer of 1878, James married Alice Gibbons, a Boston school teacher. In the same year, he signed a contract to produce a textbook in psychology by 1880. But the work grew under his hand and appeared as the 2-volume Principles of Psychology in 1890. After publication of the Principles, James lost interest in this, quote, nasty little subject. All one cares to know lies outside of it. So he had no interest in what you're about to read after, because everything lies outside of it. But we shall continue. James had been concerned with religion from an empirical point of view as early as 1869, when he had noted in a review the anomalous and discreditable attitude of a so-called enlightened society towards psychical phenomena. To ascertain the appropriate stall or pigeonhole for these wild facts, he helped organize the American Society of Psychical Research in 1884 on a vacation climb in the Adirondacks in 1898. I knew I liked this guy. James underwent a variety of religious experience. It seemed as if the gods of all the nature mythologies were holding an indescribable meeting in my breast with the moral gods of the inner life. Doubtless, in more ways than one, things in the Edinburgh lectures will be traceable to it, wrote his wife. The climb, however, overtaxed his heart, which would not have impaired his health if he had not essayed the Adirondacks the following summer and lost his way. There followed 2 years of complete collapse. Thus, the Gifford Lectures were not finished until 1902, when they were also published in book form as the Varieties of Religious Experience. James, forced to limit his teaching, now turned his energy toward philosophy. 30 years before, a Harvard colleague had founded pragmatism, which James interpreted in a series of lectures collected as Pragmatism, a new name for some old ways of thinking, in 1907. His replies to the criticisms this invoked appeared as The Meaning of Truth. Does consciousness exist? The thing and its relations. And other studies were published posthumously as essays in radical empiricism. The same essential position was stated less technically as a pluralistic universe, 1909. James started rounding out his philosophical system, but was forced to leave it an arch built only on one side, to be published after his death as Some Principles of Philosophy. In the spring of 1910, it seemed advisable for him to go to Europe for his health. Too much sitting up and talking with friends more than offset any benefits he might have received, and despairing of any relief, he turned homeward. He died 2 days after his return at his country home in Chocorua, New Hampshire. Shout out Chocorua. Shout out New Hampshire. Now, we're going to start with Chapter 1, The Scope of Psychology. But just to give you a little idea of some of the things that Mr. William James did cover, he wrote about the functions of the brain, habit, the automaton theory, the mind stuff theory, the methods and snares of psychology, the relations of minds to other things, the stream of thought, the consciousness of self, attention, conception, discrimination and comparison, association, the perception of time, memory, sensation, imagination, the perception of things, the perception of space, the perception of reality, reasoning, the production of movement, instinct, the emotions, will, hypnotism, it's a good one, and the necessary truths and the effects of experience. So we're going to move into Chapter 1 now. Chapter 1. Chapter 1 we'll move into now, but I'm wondering, should I do some whispers for this? Should I bounce in and out? Should it be all whispers? I'm testing the waters here. I did a thing earlier where I got real close and I whispered, and I really liked that. It sounded really neat. It sounded really nice. I'm wondering if I should do that again, or if it's overkill. What's the most relaxing? Whispers, psychology, the science of mental health. So now we have chapter 1, the scope of psychology. Psychology is the science of mental life, both of its phenomena and of their conditions. The phenomena are such things as we call feelings, desires, cognitions, reasonings, decisions, and the like, and superficially considered, their variety and complexity is such as to leave a chaotic impression on the observer. The most natural and consequently the earliest way of unifying the material was first to classify it as well as might be, and secondly, to affiliate the diverse mental modes thus found upon a simple entity, the personal soul, of which there are taken to be so many facultative manifestations. Now, for instance, the soul manifests its faculty of memory, now of reasoning, now of volition, or again, its imagination or its appetite. This is the orthodox spiritualistic theory of scholasticism and of common sense. Another, and a less obvious way of unifying the chaos is to seek common elements in the diverse mental facts rather than a common agent behind them, and to explain them constructively by the various forms of arrangement of these elements, as one explains houses by stones or bricks. The associationist schools of Herbart in Germany and of Hume, the Mills and Bain in Britain, have thus constructed a psychology without a soul, by taking discrete ideas, faint or vivid, and showing how, by their cohesions, repulsions, and forms of succession, such things as reminiscences, perceptions, emotions, volitions, passions, theories, and all the other furnishings of an individual's mind may be engendered. The very self or ego of the individual comes in this way to be viewed no longer as the pre-existing source of the representations, but rather as their last and most complicated fruit. Now, if we strive rigorously to simplify the phenomena in either of these ways, we soon become aware of inadequacies in our method. Any particular cognition, for example, or recollection, is accounted for on the soul theory by being referred to the spiritual faculties of cognition or memory. These faculties themselves are thought of as absolute properties of the soul. That is, to take the case of memory, no reason is given why we should remember a fact as it happened, except that so to remember it constitutes the essence of our recollective power. We may, as spiritualists, try to explain our memory's failures and blunders by secondary causes, but its successes can invoke no factors save the existence of certain objective things to be remembered on the one hand, and of our faculty of memory on the other. When, for instance, I recall my graduation day and drag all its incidents and emotions up from death's dateless night, no mechanical cause can explain this process, nor can any analysis reduce it to lower terms or make its nature seem other than an ultimate datum, which, whether we rebel or not at its mysteriousness, must simply be taken for granted if we were to psychologize it at all. However, the associationist may represent the present ideas as thronging and arranging themselves. Still, the spiritualist insists he has in the end to admit that something, be it brain, be it ideas, be it association, knows pastime as past and fills it out with this or that event. And when the spiritualist calls memory irreducible faculty, he says no more than this admission of the associationist already grants. And yet, the admission is far from being a satisfactory simplification of the concrete facts. For why should this absolute God-given faculty retain so much better the events of yesterday than those of last year? And best of all, those of an hour ago? Why, again, in old age, should its grasp of childhood events seem firmest? Why should illness and exhaustion enfeeble it? Why should repeating an experience strengthen our recollection of it? Why should drugs, fevers, asphyxia, and excitement resuscitate things long forgotten? If we content ourselves with merely affirming that the faculty of memory is so peculiarly constituted by nature as to exhibit these oddities, we seem little the better for having invoked it. For our explanation becomes as complicated as that of the crude facts with which we started. Moreover, there is something grotesque and irrational in the supposition that the soul is equipped with elementary powers of such an ingeniously intricate sort. Why should our memory cling more easily to the near than the remote? Such peculiarities seem quite fantastic and might be the precise opposites of what they are. Evidently, then, the faculty does not exist absolutely, but works under conditions, and the quest of the conditions becomes the psychologist's most interesting task. However firmly he may hold to the soul and her remembering faculty, he must acknowledge that she never exerts the latter without a cue, and that something must always precede and remind us of whatever we are to recollect. An idea, says the associationist, an idea associated with the remembered thing. And this explains also why things repeatedly met with are more easily recollected, for their associates on the various occasions furnish so many distinct avenues of recall. But this does not explain the effects of fever, exhaustion, hypnotism, old age, and the like. And in general, the pure associationist's account of our mental life is almost as bewildering as that of the pure spiritualist. This multitude of ideas existing absolutely, yet clinging together, and weaving an endless carpet of themselves like dominoes in ceaseless change, or the bits of glass in a kaleidoscope. Whence do they get their fantastic laws of clinging, and why do they cling in just the shapes they do? For this, the associationist must introduce the order of experience in the outer world. The dance of ideas is a copy, somewhat mutilated and altered, of the order of phenomena. But the slightest reflection shows that phenomena have absolutely no power to influence our ideas until they have first impressed our senses and our brain. The bare existence of a past fact is no ground for our remembering it. Unless we have seen it or somehow undergone it, we shall never know of its having been. The experiences of the body are thus one of the conditions of the faculty of memory being what it is, and a very small amount of reflection on facts shows that one part of the body, namely the brain, is the part whose experiences are directly concerned. If the nervous communication be cut off between the brain and other parts, the experiences of those other parts are non-existent for the mind. The eye is blind, the ear is deaf, the hand insensible and motionless. And conversely, if the brain be injured, consciousness is abolished or altered, even though every other organ in the body is ready to play its normal part. A blow on the head, a sudden subtraction of blood, the pressure of an apoplectic hemorrhage may have the first effect, while a few ounces of alcohol or grains of opium or hashish or a whiff of chloroform or nitrous oxide gas are sure to have the second. The delirium of fever, the altered self of insanity, are all due to foreign matters circulating through the brain or to pathological changes in that organ's substance. The fact that the brain is the one immediate bodily condition of the mental operations is indeed so universally admitted nowadays that I need spend no more time in illustrating it, but will simply postulate and pass on. The whole remainder of the book will be more or less of a proof that the postulate was correct. Bodily experiences, therefore, and more particularly brain experiences, must take a place amongst those conditions of the mental life of which psychology need take account. The spiritualist and the associationist must both be cerebralists, to the extent at least of admitting that certain peculiarities in the way of working of their own favorite principles are explicable only by the fact that the brain laws are a co-determinant of the result. In still another way, the psychologist is forced to be something of a nerve physiologist. Mental phenomena are not only conditioned a parte ante by bodily processes, but they lead to them a parte post. That they lead to acts is, of course, the most familiar of truths. But I do not merely mean acts in the sense of voluntary and deliberate muscular performances. Mental states occasion also changes in the caliber of blood vessels, or alteration in the heartbeats, or processes more subtle still in glands and viscera. If these are taken into account, as well as acts which follow at some remote period, because the mental state was once there, it will be safe to lay down the general law that no mental modification ever occurs which is not accompanied or followed by a bodily change. Our psychology must therefore take account not only of the conditions antecedent to mental states, but of their resultant consequences as well. But actions originally prompted by conscious intelligence may grow so automatic by habit as to be apparently unconsciously performed. Standing, walking, buttoning and unbuttoning, piano playing, talking, even saying one's prayers, may be done when the mind is absorbed in other things. The performances of animal instinct seem semi-automatic, and the reflex acts of self-preservation certainly are so. Yet they resemble intelligent acts in bringing about the same ends at which the animal's consciousness, on other occasions, deliberately aims. Shall the study of such machine-like yet purposive acts as these be included in psychology? The boundary line of the mental is certainly vague. It is better not to be pedantic, but to let the science be as vague as its subject, and include such phenomena as these, if by doing so we can throw any light on the main business in hand. It will ere long be seen, I trust, that we can, and that we gain much more by a broad than by a narrow conception of our subject. At a certain stage in the development of every science, a degree of vagueness is what best consists with fertility. On the whole, few recent formulas have done more real service of a rough sort in psychology than the Spencerian one, that the essence of mental life and of bodily life are one, namely, the adjustment of inner to outer relations. Such a formula is vagueness incarnate, but because it takes into account the fact that minds inhabit environments which act on them and on which they in turn react, because, in short, it takes mind in the midst of all its concrete relations, it is immensely more fertile than the old-fashioned rational psychology, which treated the soul as a detached existent, sufficient unto itself, and assumed to consider only its nature and properties. I shall therefore feel free to make any sallies into zoology or into pure nerve physiology, which may seem instructive for our purposes, but otherwise shall leave those sciences to the physiologists. Can we state more distinctly still the manner in which the mental life seems to intervene between impressions made from without upon the body and reactions of the body upon the outer world again? Let us look at a few facts. If some iron filings be sprinkled on a table and a magnet brought near them, they will fly through the air for a certain distance and stick to its surface. A savage, seeing the phenomenon, explains it as the result of an attraction or love between the magnet and the filings. But let a card cover the poles of the magnet, and the filings will press forever against its surface without its ever occurring to them to pass around its sides and thus come into more direct contact with the object of their love. Blow bubbles through a tube into the bottom of a pail of water. They will rise to the surface and mingle with the air. Their action again may be poetically interpreted as due to a longing to recombine with the mother atmosphere above the surface. But if you invert a jar full of water over the pail, they will rise and remain lodged beneath its bottom, shut in from the outer air, although a slight deflection from their course at the outset or a redescent toward the rim of the jar when they found their upward course impeded would easily have set them free. If now we pass from such actions as these to those of living things, we notice a striking difference. Romeo wants Juliet as the filings want the magnet, and if no obstacles intervene, he moves towards her by a straight line such as they. But Romeo and Juliet, if a wall be built between them, do not remain idiotically pressing their faces against its opposite sides, like the magnet and the filings with the card. Romeo soon finds a circuitous way, by scaling the wall or otherwise, of touching Juliet's lips directly. With the filings, the path is fixed. Whether it reaches the end depends on accidents. With the lover, it is the end which is fixed. The path may be modified indefinitely. Suppose a living frog is in the position with which we placed our bubbles of air, namely, at the bottom of a jar of water. The want of breath will soon make him also long to rejoin the mother atmosphere, and he will take the shortest path to his end by swimming upwards. But if a jar full of water be inverted over him, he will not, like the bubbles, perpetually press his nose against its unyielding roof, but will restlessly explore the neighborhood until, by redescending again, he has discovered a path around its brim to the goal of his desires. Again, the fixed end, the varying means. Such contrasts between living and inanimate performances end by leading men to deny in the physical world that final purposes exist at all. Loves and desires are today no longer imputed to particles of iron or of air. No one supposes now that the end of any activity which they may display is an ideal purpose presiding over the activity from its outset and soliciting or drawing it into being by a sort of via front. The end, on the contrary, is deemed a mere passive result, pushed into being a tergo, having had, so to speak, no voice in its own production. Alter the pre-existing conditions, and with inorganic materials, you bring forth each time a different apparent end. But with intelligent agents, altering the conditions changes the activity displayed, but not the end reached. For here, the idea of the yet unrealized end cooperates with the conditions to determine what the activities shall be. The pursuance of future ends and the choice of means for their attainment are thus the mark and criterion of the presence of mentality in a phenomenon. We all use this test to discriminate between an intelligent and a mechanical performance. We impute no mentality to sticks and stones because they never seem to move for the sake of anything, but always when pushed, and then indifferently, and with no sign of choice. So we unhesitatingly call them senseless. Just so, we form our decision upon the deepest of all philosophic problems. Is the cosmos an expression of intelligence, rational in its inward nature, or a brute external fact, pure and simple? If we find ourselves, in contemplating it, unable to banish the impression that it is a realm of final purposes, that it exists for the sake of something, we place intelligence at the heart of it and have a religion. If, on the contrary, in surveying its irremediable flux, we can think of the present only as so much mere mechanical sprouting from the past, occurring with no reference to the future, we are atheists and materialists. In the lengthy discussions which psychologists have carried on about the amount of intelligence displayed by lower mammals, or the amount of consciousness involved in the functions of the nerve centers of reptiles, the same test has always been applied. Is the character of the actions such that we must believe them to be performed for the sake of their result? The result in question, as we shall hereafter abundantly see, is as a rule a useful one. The animal is, on the whole, safer under the circumstances for bringing it forth. So far, the action has a teleological character, but such mere outward teleology as this might still be the blind result of via tergo, the growth and movement of plants, the processes of development, digestion, secretion, etc. In animals, supply innumerable instances of performances useful to the individual, which may nevertheless be, and by most of us are supposed to be, produced by automatic mechanism. The physiologist does not confidently assert conscious intelligence in the frog's spinal cord until he has shown that the useful result which the nervous machinery brings forth under a given irritation remains the same when the machinery is altered. If, to take with stock instance, the right knee of a headless frog be irritated with acid, the right foot will wipe it off. When, however, this foot is amputated, the animal will often raise the left foot to the spot and wipe the offending material away. Pfluger and Lewis reason from such facts in the following way. If the first reaction were the result of mere machinery, they say, if that irritated portion of the skin discharged the right leg as a trigger discharges its own barrel of a shotgun, then amputating the right foot would indeed frustrate the wiping, but would not make the left leg move. It would simply result in the right stump moving through the empty air, which is in fact the phenomenon sometimes observed. The right trigger makes no effort to discharge the left barrel if the right one be unloaded, Nor does an electrical machine ever get restless because it can only emit sparks and not hem pillowcases like a sewing machine. If, on the contrary, the right leg originally moved for the purpose of wiping the acid, then nothing is more natural than that. When the easiest means of effecting that purpose prove fruitless, other means should be tried. Every failure must keep the animal in a state of disappointment, which will lead to all sorts of new trials and devices, and tranquility will not ensue till one of these, by a happy stroke, achieves the wished-for end. In a similar way, Goltz ascribes intelligence to the frog's optic lobes and cerebellum. We alluded above to the manner in which a sound frog imprisoned in water will discover an outlet to the atmosphere. Goltz found that frogs, deprived of their cerebral hemispheres, would often exhibit a like ingenuity. Such a frog, after rising from the bottom and finding his farther upward progress checked by the glass bell which has been inverted over him, will not persist in butting his nose against the obstacle until dead of suffocation, but will often redescend and emerge from up under its rim as if not a definite mechanical propulsion upwards, but rather a conscious desire to reach the air by hook or crook were the mainspring of his activity. Goltz concluded from this that the hemispheres are not the sole seat of intellect in frogs. He made the same inference from observing that a brainless frog will turn over from his back to his belly when one of his legs is sewed up, although the movements required are then very different from those excited under normal circumstances by the same annoying position. They seem determined, consequently, not merely by the antecedent irritant, but by the final end, though the irritant, of course, is what makes the end desired. Another brilliant German author, Liebman, argues against the brain's mechanism accounting for mental action by very similar considerations. A machine as such, he says, will bring forth right results when it is in good order, and wrong results if out of repair. But both kinds of results flow with equally fatal necessity from their conditions. We cannot suppose the clockwork whose structure fatally determines it to a certain rate of speed, noticing that this speed is too slow or too fast, and vainly trying to correct it. Its conscience, if it has any, should be as good as that of the best chronometer, for both alike obey equally well the same eternal mechanical laws from behind. But if the brain be out of order, and the man says, 2 × 4 are 2, instead of 2 × 4 are 8, or else I must go to the coal to buy the wharf, instead of I must go to the wharf to buy the coal, instantly there arises a consciousness of error. The wrong performance, though it obey the same mechanical law as the right, is nevertheless condemned as contradicting the inner law, the law from in front, the purpose or ideal for which the brain should act, whether it do so or not. We shall not discuss here whether these writers, in drawing their conclusions, have done justice to all the premises involved in the cases they treat. We quote their arguments only to show how they appeal to the principle that no actions but such as are done for an end, and show a choice of means, can be called indubitable expressions of mind. I shall then adopt this criterion by which to circumscribe the subject matter of this work so far as action enters into it. Many nervous performances will therefore be unmentioned as being purely physiological, nor will the anatomy of the nervous system and organs of sense be described anew. The reader will find in H.N. Martin's Human Body, in G.T. Ladd's Physiological Psychology, and in all the other standard anatomies and physiologies, a mass of information which we must regard as preliminary and take for granted in the present work. of the functions of the cerebral hemispheres, however, since they directly subserve consciousness, it will be well to give them some account. And the footnote is, nothing is easier than to familiarize oneself with the mammalian brain. Get a sheep's head, a small saw, chisel, scalpel, and forceps. All three can be best had from a surgical instrument maker, and unravel its parts, either by the aid of a human dissecting book, such as Holden's Manual of Anatomy, or by the specific directions ad hoc given in such books as Foster and Langley's Practical Physiology, or Morrell's Comparative Anatomy and Dissection of Mammalia. So, to be clear, at the end of chapter 1, he advises you to get your hands on a sheep's brain and dissect it, only with the proper instruments, of course, and that would be very helpful in understanding the brain. Thank you for joining me for chapter 1 of William James' Principles of Psychology.